in the dead cold heart of rural Wisconsin, where winters seemed to freeze sound itself. The town of Plainfield carried a quiet that was almost unnatural. Residents used to say the silence out there pressed on your bones. For decades, it kept its secrets well, until November 1957, when police officers stepped into a farmhouse that felt less like a home and more like a wound carved into the earth. What they uncovered would stain American memory forever. But the roots of that horror began much earlier, in 1906, with the birth of a boy named Edward Theodore Gein. Ed grew up under a roof where tenderness did not exist. His father, George, was a drink-ravaged brute who swung his fists more often than he spoke. But the true ruler of the household was Augusta, a woman whose faith burned like a furnace, and she intended to shield her sons from that corruption at any cost. To Augusta, every woman on earth, except herself, was an agent of temptation. She told her boys that virtue was war, that desire was damnation, and that the world beyond their farm was crawling with immorality, waiting to sink teeth into them. Under such sermons, Ed's childhood became smaller and smaller, until it was nothing but the farm, the chores, and Augusta's looming shadow. He adored her, feared her, needed her, and so he grew strange. Neighbors noticed how Ed would laugh at nothing, a quiet, breathy chuckle as if answering a whisper the rest of them couldn't hear. Children avoided him, adults tolerated him, but nobody truly understood him. Augusta ensured it stayed that way. When Ed was 8, the family moved to a vast, isolated farm, 155 acres of fields where the wind howled like a living thing. Isolation wrapped around the Gein family like a shroud. Years there shaped Ed into something solitary and inward, a boy whose world was one woman and one voice, his mother's. Then came the first fracture. In 1944, Ed and his older brother Henry were burning brush when the fire broke loose and swallowed the field in smoke. When help arrived, Ed led searchers directly, unnervingly, to Henry's lifeless body. The burns were minimal. His death was ruled accidental. But whispers traveled through Plainfield. People said Ed's face was blank that night, as if he were lost in some fog no one else could see. Only months later, Augusta suffered a stroke. The illness bound her to Ed, deepening his dependence, tightening the invisible strings between mother and son. When she finally died in late 1945, something inside Ed seemed to dissolve. For the first time in his life, the only voice he trusted had gone silent. But silence creates echoes, and Ed began hearing things again. After Augusta's death, he sealed her rooms shut as though preserving a shrine. The rest of the house decayed around him. He slept beside the kitchen. He filled the emptiness with books about anatomy, death, and old wartime atrocities. He became fascinated with transformation, how bodies changed, how skin could be shaped, how identity could be molded by force. He began visiting cemeteries at night. He followed the obituaries as if they were invitations, choosing women who reminded him of Augusta, women whose faces seemed carved from the same cold, stern mold. Under moonlight, he dug into the earth not out of hatred but out of longing. He later claimed he often felt not entirely himself, as if he stepped into those graveyards guided by something unseen, lured by a voice he could not ignore. The people of Plainfield had no idea that the quiet handyman who shoveled their snow and babysat their children wandered cemeteries with a shovel and a purpose twisted beyond comprehension. For nearly a decade, Ed's isolated world sank deeper into delusion. His farm became a place no one visited, a place where the windows looked out onto miles of darkness and the wind brought nothing but the sound of his own thoughts. Ed believed he could rebuild something lost, reshape loneliness into presence, reshape sorrow into flesh, reshape death into a grotesque kind of companionship. But obsession never stays contained. In 1954, Mary Hogan vanished from her tavern. The bloodstains told the story plainly, but no one suspected the soft-spoken local with the vacant smile. When Ed joked to neighbors, "She's at my place right now," they laughed, assuming he was just strange. The truth was far worse. Years later, in 1957, when Bernice Worden disappeared from her hardware store, the trail finally led to Ed. Her son found the receipt for antifreeze, Ed's name scrawled in her handwriting, and dread settled over Plainfield like a second winter. That evening, officers approached the Gein farm. They expected a crime scene. They found a nightmare. In the woodshed hung the lifeless form of Bernice, the cold air stiff around her like a second body. Inside the house, the officers encountered a darkness thicker than the shadows. Rooms were filled with things that shouldn't exist, things shaped by hands that had lost the ability to understand human boundaries. Human remnants arranged like decorations, tools no sane person would craft, objects made from the dead for purposes that lived only in Ed's fractured mind. Reporters later called it a house of horrors, but that phrase doesn't capture the wrongness of it. The sense that the place itself seemed haunted, not by ghosts, but by the echo of a broken soul trying to rebuild what should never be rebuilt. Ed confessed with a calmness that chilled investigators more than rage ever could. He spoke of trances, of forces, of hearing his mother's voice, of needing to make her again. And when doctors examined him, they diagnosed him with schizophrenia, psychosis, and a reality torn beyond repair. He never fully returned from the world he'd built for himself. Ed Gein spent the rest of his life in institutions, quiet, polite, almost gentle, as if the storm inside him had finally burned itself out. When he died in 1984, he was buried in Plainfield in an unmarked grave, swallowed by the same earth he once violated. Today, the town still feels the echo of what happened there, and that old farmhouse, burned to ashes, still haunts American folklore. A place where silence once grew fangs, a place where loneliness learned to kill.